Fight for the unborn. One of the Democratic frontrunners appears to double down on his support for late-term abortion.
Tonight, a look at the crossroads between faith and politics. I'm Mark Irons here at St. Anselm College in Manchester, New Hampshire. Democrats will be taking the debate stage here, but why does a small Catholic college keep hosting major political events? We've got that story.
Synod on the Amazon. New developments in the Vatican's document that might address whether married men may be ordained as priests. And the footsteps of Christ. Pope Francis tells the faithful not to be afraid of humiliation. We'll explain. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, February 7th, 2020. Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. The top Democratic presidential candidates will appear at a small Catholic college in New Hampshire tonight. St. Anselm is no stranger to the national spotlight. The campus has been hosting major political debates for decades. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports now from Manchester, New Hampshire. Mark.
Tracy, Democratic presidential hopefuls will debate here ahead of next week's primary vote in New Hampshire. St. Anselm was a Benedictine monk who followed a Benedictine rule. All who arrive as guests are to be welcomed like Christ. That rule is lived here, even when some guests' political views don't align with Catholic faith. During an appearance at St. Anselm today, Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders went on the attack against President Trump,
who is a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, a xenophobe, and a religious bigot.
This Benedictine college has been welcoming presidential candidates to campus for over 60 years. Everyone from JFK and Jesse Jackson to Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush.
We have become a major player in terms of hosting events, speakers, debates.
The school's president, Joseph Favaza, says part of the mission here is to create a space where students can engage with ideas, even when those ideas conflict with church teaching.
Reproductive rights are a constitutional right.
All the Democrats running for president support abortion. President Favaza says the college hears from Catholics all over the country who have concerns, but he reassures them
we cannot and do not promote any particular candidate at all.
We asked these Catholic students to weigh in. They all recently attended the March for Life in Washington, D.C., and in the Benedictine spirit of hospitality are excited to welcome Democrats here.
We do need to be open to listening to them and respecting their dignity as people, but still staying grounded in what we believe in. We don't support abortion. We're not going to support abortion. Jacob Halterman says he sees problems with both political parties and isn't planning to vote Republican or Democrat.
The Democrats, I think, are right on a lot of things when it comes to health care and immigration. I'm not a fan of President Trump, but I appreciate what his policies have done for the pro-life movement, for the protection of the unborn.
Tim Holmes says he'll most likely vote for President Trump in 2020 because of his support for unborn babies. But he hopes pro-lifers will continue to have dialogue with those who have differing views.
How else are we going to affect change if both sides are so polarized that we're not going to even talk to each other? Who would Christ be if he did not invite people in who didn't agree with him?
Both Tim and Jacob are members of the College Knights of Columbus chapter, and they're both discerning a vocation to the Benedictines. Tim says St. Anselm College has changed his life.
I was never told that I was loved by God until I got here.
President Trump was here for the 2016 Republican primary debate as a candidate, and he'll return on Monday night here in Manchester, New Hampshire for a rally, and that's on the eve of Tuesday's primary election. Tracy.
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. Tonight's Democratic debate is shaping up to be the fiercest clash yet. Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg enter the night as the top targets, having emerged from the chaotic Iowa caucuses earlier this week, tied for the lead. Today, Buttigieg is causing controversy for pro-life Democrats. Catholic news agency's Matt Hadra reports from Capitol Hill.
Good evening, Tracy. That's right. Former Mayor Pete Buttigieg has made it clear that he supports legalized abortion. And one prominent pro-life Democrat is criticizing the party for closing its doors to pro-life Americans.
Democratic presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg tells ABC's The View he supports late-term abortion. All of the 7 Democrats at tonight's debate have declared they will defend legal abortion.
To stand with you.
In a time when the president is making history, speaking at the March for Life, and the administration is confirming judges viewed to be pro-life in high numbers, Democrats are drawing a line in the sand and pro-life Americans are feeling cut off. Charlie Camosi is a Catholic professor of theological ethics. He stepped down from the board of directors for Democrats for Life, saying Democrats have made it clear there is no room for pro-life Americans in their party. He writes in the New York Post, "Normally Democrats are the party of energetic government protecting the vulnerable from violence. The straw that broke this camel's back was Pete Buttigieg's extremism. Here was a mainstream Democratic candidate suggesting that abortion is okay up to the point the baby draws her first breath. When I heard that, I realized we were fighting a losing battle." Camosi says as many as a third of Democrats identify as pro-life. Destiny Herndon de la Rosa calls herself a pro-life feminist. She says abortion is the human rights issue of our time.
At New Wave Feminists, we call ourselves the island of the pro-life feminist misfits. We really don't fit in anywhere. And so collectively, we are building power for those who see a need for consistent nonviolence from the womb to the tomb. And it is a growing movement because there are so many people who are so tired with both political parties and having to compromise so much when it comes to human rights.
Presidential candidate Amy Klobuchar says that if elected, she will reverse President Trump's pro-life protections in her first 100 days in office. All eyes will be on Sanders and Buttigieg at tonight's debate, where Joe Biden's campaign says that he will be making a fiery case for his candidacy. We'll also hear from Elizabeth Warren, Tom Steyer, and Andrew Yang tonight. At the Capitol, Matt Hadro, EWTN News Nightly.
The war of words between President Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi shows no signs of slowing down. Today, the president says when the Speaker of the House tore up her copy of the State of the Union, she broke the law.
First of all, it's an official document. You're not allowed. It's illegal what she did. She broke the law. But I haven't been asked a question other than a lot of people that viewed it. They couldn't believe that she did it. I thought it was terrible. I thought it was very disrespectful to the chamber and to the country.
Pelosi tore up the speech Tuesday night. She later said that she did so to protest the falsehoods in the address. It seems the spread of the coronavirus may be slowing, at least in China. The country is reporting another 3,000 cases today, the lowest increase so far this week. Meanwhile, 3 people from the U.S. have been confirmed among the passengers aboard the Princess cruise ship. It's quarantined off Japan. Their cases were identified through health screenings of all guests and crew by the Japanese Ministry of Health. They are now being treated at local hospitals. The cruise ship reported another 41 cases of the virus. At last count, the outbreak has infected over 31,000 worldwide and killed 637, with virtually all of those deaths inside China. In Australia, wildfires have been burning for months, and now they are dealing with heavy rains and flooding. Firefighters say the wet weather is helping them to deal with the wildfires.
We've already seen a good impact with the rainfall, Ros. We're down to 42 fires at the moment. 17 of those are still not contained, and we're optimistic over the coming days, certainly the next week potentially, as we head through this weekend and right through next week.
While the heavy rains are helping Australia deal with a drought and wildfires, roads are closed and cars are flooded in the eastern part of the country near Sydney. 6 people had to be rescued from floodwaters. In the Middle East, Turkey and Syria are inching closer to all-out fighting. Turkey sent more tanks and armored vehicles across the border before dawn this morning. The deployment is in response to a Syrian offensive on rebel areas. A ceasefire collapsed in December after the Syrian army launched the attacks on the rebels with the help of Russian forces. 13 Syrian troops and 8 Turkish soldiers were killed in the fighting earlier this week. The leader of the Catholic Church and Myanmar is asking the government to allow clergy to vote in elections. Cardinal Charles Bo says the country's constitution bans members of religious orders from casting a ballot. Cardinal Bo calls voting a sacred duty. General elections in Myanmar, also known as Burma, are expected by the end of the year. Pope Francis is appointing 2 new bishops for Chile. Jorge Enrique Concha is taking over the Diocese of Osorno, and the Holy Father is also naming Father Sergio Hernan Perez as Bishop of San Bartolome de Chile. Both dioceses had been vacant since 2018 and the explosion of the sex abuse scandal in Chile. The European Union is weighing in on a dispute between the Serbian Orthodox Church and the government in Montenegro.
The world is looking at you. This is an important issue for everybody, and we're interested in dialogue. And I would encourage everybody for dialogue and also for a solution that is acceptable for everybody.
The European Union's Enlargement Commissioner says the bloc is willing to help to find a solution. Montenegro is pushing to join the EU. Thousands of Orthodox Serbs rallied across the country yesterday. They are protesting a recently passed law which the church believes could result in the seizure of its properties. The government denies the claim. The apostolic exhortation of the Synod on the Amazon is coming out next week. The Synod on the Amazon took place last October, where bishops from Latin America came together for almost a month to speak about the pastoral and environmental situation in the Amazon region. At the end of the Synod, the bishops asked the Holy Father to allow the possible ordination of seasoned married men due to a shortage of priests and appealed for the rights of the indigenous peoples. Andrea Gallioducci, Vatican analyst for EWTN News, joins us now from Rome. Andrea, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for calling me.
Well, today the Vatican announced that the post-Synod document will come out next Wednesday. What do we know about it and what can we expect?
Well, the document will be certainly based on the final document of the Synod, the Pan-Amazonian Synod, that ended back on October 25th. The final document was kind of a wide document exploring all the issues discussed. There are a lot of issues discussed. Among these issues, there are also the possibility to ordain married priests in some specific occasions, the so-called viri probati, men of proved faith. But there are also other issues like evangelizing the Amazonian people or fostering the Amazonian culture to some extent. So we can expect that there will be some bite of everything of the final document into the final text, the post-synod exhortation by the Pope, but still we don't know yet. We don't know because the document was given by the Pope on December 27th, and the final version with all the translation and the refinement was ended on February the 2nd, and so we don't know how the draft then changed in the meantime.
Is it possible that Pope Francis will approve the proposal in the Synod final document to ordaining seasoned married men?
Well, this possibility has been widely speculated in the past days, especially with some alleged leaks from the final document. I don't think there will be a specific possibility to ordain married priests or an opening, a change in the doctrine, I would say. I don't think that. I just think that in some occasions there will be a so-called Amazonian exception, which means that in some specific occasion where a priest cannot go, the Pope might accept some married men of proved faith, as I said earlier, able to celebrate, not to celebrate Mass, to deliver the sacraments. But this is something already happening with permanent deacons. So we have to see, because I don't think the Pope is going to change anything. I really think it's not really about that.
How would these changes affect not only the Amazon region, but the Universal Church?
Well, if there will be the so-called Amazonian exception, so if for Amazonia there will be made some specific exceptions in liturgy or in other issues, doctrinal issues, as we were saying, well, it's possibility that other regions in the world will ask for their particular exception. I'm thinking above all about the Germans, the German Church. The German Church is now celebrating their own synod, and they say that it's deliberative and it's going to be binding. And it's also about issues like sexuality or gender issues, homosexuality, and so on. So the Amazonian exception can be a sort of lead for other exceptions. And that's why I don't think there will be, the Amazonian exceptions will be so much fostered in the document. There will be something more vague, more based on concrete issues rather than on general issues.
Andrea, quickly, before I let you go, what else can we expect from the papal document?
Well, I expect a papal document that is mostly political, mostly a green document, another Laudato Si, another encyclical on green things, because I think the Pope has this vision of Latin American continent to be united. The Pope has been very much imbued by this vision. So this document will foster a new Latin American united under one main subject, that is Amazonia, main subject that brings up all the indigenous people, the native people, and that will try to combine native people with the new people that came after the so-called colonial people. So I expect the document to be a huge push for a Latin American continent, a Latin American strong continent, that will also be a source for theology.
Andrea, thank you so much. Andrea Galeoducci, Vatican analyst for EWTN News. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Coming up, nearly a month after a string of earthquakes, U.S. lawmakers debate sending aid to Puerto Rico. The U.S. House today passed a bill granting more than $20 billion in aid money to Puerto Rico.
The yeas are 237 and the nays are 161. The bill is passed.
A swarm of earthquakes last month have set back the island territory's recovery from the hurricane devastation of 2017. The legislation approved by a mostly party-line vote would provide more than $5 billion in emergency funds. Friday's debate exposed bipartisan frustration with the federal bureaucracy. President Trump toured the damage in October 2017. He has promised to veto the legislation, accusing the island government of mismanagement. 107 House Democrats have joined in signing a letter to President Trump criticizing his new Middle East peace plan. Trump's plan was embraced by Israel but rejected by the Palestinians. The Democratic congressmen say it pushes Israelis and Palestinians toward further conflict. Tomorrow marks the World Day of Prayer, Reflection, and Action Against Human Trafficking. Catholics across the globe are encouraged to remember and pray for all those affected by human trafficking. The observation coincides with the feast day of St. Josephine Bakhita. St. Josephine was kidnapped as a child and sold into slavery in Sudan and Italy. She won her freedom with the help of the Canossian sisters in Venice and became a Canossian nun herself. St. Josephine Bakhita dedicated her life to sharing her testament of deliverance from slavery and comforting the poor and suffering. And joining me now is Dr. Hillary Chester, Associate Director of Anti-Trafficking Programs at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Dr. Chester, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, first off, let's talk about St. Josephine. Can you talk a little bit about her and, of course, the significance of tomorrow?
Sure. I think she's a really wonderful example for the Catholic Church to look to someone to really epitomize the spirit of survivors of slavery or bondage or exploitation. As you noted in the introduction, she was sold into slavery as a child, ultimately ended up working for a diplomatic family from Italy. And when she was back in Italy with them, she began spending time with Canossian sisters and learned about the Gospels and really came to understand that as a child of God, as a person in the image of God, that she couldn't be enslaved. So she really asserted her own sense of self-worth and dignity. And I think that's just a really strong example for survivors that certainly we need to be looking out and trying to assist brothers and sisters that are enslaved, but they also can really assert themselves. And I think that's what she really epitomizes that.
Yeah, and human trafficking affects just about every community. Can we talk about that? A lot of people think sometimes it's just sex trafficking, but that's not the only way people are exploited.
Exactly. In fact, worldwide, probably a greater number of people are being exploited in the labor sector or in what we call labor trafficking or forced labor. There's a lot of trafficking that happens in industries that are either poorly regulated or unregulated. So when you think about people working in other people's homes, people working kind of in the back of restaurants, or people working where they're being put out on fishing boats and they're at sea for months, maybe even years at a time, and they just don't have contact, and no one's really kind of looking out for the welfare of workers in those kind of situations. And so there's a lot of exploitation that can happen there. People can be in debt bondage where they paid for recruitment fees and to get a job that they thought was going to be legitimate. But then they're just being sort of nickeled and dimed and just losing money at every turn. And so it can be really insidious in that way, or it can just be very overt, where people really are being essentially almost bought and sold, and then they're being forced to work for absolutely no compensation. So it's really the whole array.
Yeah, can you give us a sense of how many people worldwide are impacted by it?
It's a difficult number. The International Labor Organization sort of grapples with this number worldwide, and some other international organizations as well. We think it could be as high as 38 million, and that would include men, women, children in sexual exploitation, in the commercial sex industry against their will, and then also people in all different kinds of employment sectors and work sectors, as well as things like forced marriages, which are like contracted brokered marriages, and then the women in most cases that are exploited in those kind of situations are really not treated as a spouse at all, but really as sort of like a worker in the home. And so when you kind of put all those numbers together, it can be as high as 38 million.
Pope Francis had described human trafficking as, quote, a wound against contemporary society. I know you've worked with folks who've been trafficked before. What have they said about it?
I mean, I think survivors who are aware of Pope Francis recognize him as being especially passionate about this issue, and they're really grateful for the amount of attention that he brings to the issue, how often he brings people together to really encourage them to work on the issue. But I think they also recognize that that other, quotations from Pope Francis where he talks about, people on the margins and disposable people, and us just having a culture of throwaway people. And I think that really resonates with survivors, because I think they definitely felt like they were already vulnerable when they were then taken advantage of. And I think, they look to us who are not in these situations to be better stewards and to look out and think about how our choices around what we're consuming, how we're behaving, what we're doing may play into that. And I think that's where the wound comes in, that, it's not just the traffickers who are, terrible people, but all of us that are benefiting in very direct or indirect ways. We're also kind of, digging into that wound a bit.
Yeah, Dr. Chesser, thank you so much for your insight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your interest. We really appreciate it, and we're happy that people are interested in the topic.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Sure.
Lawmakers in Florida are moving closer to enacting legislation that would require parental consent before a minor can have an abortion. The state Senate voted along party lines yesterday. Republican Governor Ron DeSantis says that he supports the proposal. Florida would join 26 other states in requiring at least one parent give written permission prior to an abortion. And in Kansas, lawmakers continue to debate a measure that would overturn a state Supreme Court decision last year declaring access to abortion a fundamental right. The plan received a first round of approval yesterday. Up next, Pope Francis tells the faithful one way to follow in the footsteps of Christ. The Legionaries of Christ has elected a new superior general. Father John Connor has been the North American director of the religious order since 2014. He will serve a 6-year term. The Legionaries of Christ reported that since its founding in 1941, nearly 36 priests have been found to have committed sexual abuse of minors. Today, the Vatican completed a 2-day event in preparation for a worldwide meeting on education. The Global Compact on Education will be held in May. It is an initiative of the Holy See and Pope Francis and will feature leaders of world religions and humanitarian organizations. The goal is to promote more equitable education in public schools and make technology more accessible to everyone. Pope Francis met today with a group of Eastern Catholic patriarchs from the Middle East.
We have this kind of migratory flux of our communities outside their homelands, which is a threat to our survival.
Patriarch Ignatius Younan, Patriarch of Antioch in Lebanon, said that their meeting with Pope Francis was a way to share their concerns about the Christian communities fleeing their countries. The Eastern Church leaders traveled from Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Egypt to discuss how persecution, violence, and fundamentalism are hindering their development of a more civilized society and religious freedom. Pope Francis spoke of his desire to visit Iraq, but that the conditions are not suitable for a papal visit. And finally, tonight, Pope Francis has some advice for the faithful. Don't be afraid of a little humiliation.
Oh, sì, questa è un'ingiustizia, questa è un'umiliazione.
At his daily Mass at the Vatican, the Holy Father says being humbled can help us imitate Jesus. He adds that the best way to be a Christian is to follow the path of humility. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. We're back on Monday with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.